You're standing on hot sand. The roar above you is not an animal. It's 50,000 people, packed shoulder to shoulder, screaming for something they haven't even seen yet. The sun is directly overhead. There's nowhere to hide. And across the arena, maybe 40 meters away, a wooden gate begins to rise. You don't know what's behind it. That's the point. The crowd doesn't fully know either, and that's exactly why they came. Somewhere in the dark beneath that gate is an animal that, 3 weeks ago, was alive and free on another continent. An animal that has not eaten in days. An animal that has been deliberately, methodically starved so that the first living thing it sees in the light, which is you, looks like the only meal in the world. And here's the part nobody in those stands is thinking about. That animal traveled further to die here than most Romans will travel in their entire lives. It crossed deserts, it crossed a sea, it passed through the hands of professional hunters, soldiers, merchants, and trainers, every one of whom was paid to keep it alive just long enough to kill it in front of a crowd. So before that gate finishes rising, let's ask the question that the screaming crowd never asks. The question that turns out to be one of the strangest, most brutal, and most genuinely impressive logistical achievements of the ancient world. Where did this animal actually come from? And how on earth did the Romans get it here? Let's go. Start with the scale, because the scale is genuinely difficult to believe. When the Colosseum was inaugurated in 80 AD, the Emperor Titus threw a party, not a normal party, 100 days of games. And during those 100 days, by the most cited ancient estimates, around 9,000 animals were killed. 9,000 in a single opening ceremony. That was not even the record. A few decades later, the Emperor Trajan celebrated his military victories over the Dacians with games so enormous that the sources claim 11,000 animals were slaughtered across the festivities. Earlier, before the Colosseum even existed, the Emperor Augustus boasted in his own official record of his achievements that around 3,500 African animals had died in the spectacles he gave to the Roman people. He listed it like a resume item, like a man bragging about quarterly numbers. Stack these figures up, and a horrifying picture emerges. Over the centuries that these games ran, the number of wild animals brought to Rome and killed for entertainment ran into the hundreds of thousands, possibly more. Lions, leopards, bears, elephants, hippos, rhinos, crocodiles, ostriches, giraffes, tigers, a parade of the planet's most magnificent creatures funneled into a single building to die in the afternoon. Now, you cannot kill 9,000 animals in 100 days unless you have a supply chain, a real one, an organized, continent-spanning, professionally staffed supply chain. And that is the thing almost nobody appreciates about the Colosseum. The building is the famous part, the architecture, the arches, the engineering. But the building was just the final stop. The truly staggering machine was everything that happened before the animal ever reached Rome. So let's follow one of them backward. Let's say it's a lion, because the lion was the superstar. To Romans, the lion was the king of beasts, the ultimate symbol of power and danger, and the most prestigious animal an emperor could put in the arena. Where did Rome's lions come from? Primarily North Africa, the coastlines and interiors of what are now Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, and Morocco were, 2,000 years ago, home to the Barbary lion, a massive dark-maned subspecies that roamed territory that is today almost entirely desert and farmland. Roman North Africa was the great cat capital of the empire. Lions, leopards, panthers, and cheetahs were all sourced from that strip of the continent and shipped north across the Mediterranean. But lions were only the headline act. The full inventory of the Roman arena reads like an impossible zoo, and each animal came from a different corner of the known world. From southern Egypt and up the Nile came the truly exotic water monsters, crocodiles, hippopotamuses, and rhinoceroses. In 58 BC, a Roman official named Marcus Aemilius Scaurus brought crocodiles and a hippo from Egypt, and the crowd had quite possibly never seen anything like it. From sub-Saharan Africa, through Egyptian trade routes, came giraffes, an animal so bizarre to Roman eyes they sometimes called it a camel leopard. From the cold north came a completely different caste. Bears came from the mountains of Central Europe and the Alps. Wolves came from Gaul, which is modern France. Deer, boar, and even moose were pulled from the forests of Europe. From Britain, the wet, distant edge of the empire, the Romans imported hunting dogs and deer.
And then there was the longest journey of all, tigers. There were no tigers in Africa or Europe. The Roman tiger came from India and Persia, captured and hauled thousands of kilometers overland and by sea to reach the arena. The first tiger displayed in Rome arrived in the 1st century BC, and it would have been, to the average Roman, a creature almost from mythology. Think about what this means geographically. A single afternoon of games might feature a lion from Morocco, a bear from the Alps, a crocodile from the Nile, and a tiger from India, all dying within meters of each other, in the same building, in the same hour, in front of the same crowd. There was no other institution on Earth that pulled living creatures from that many distant ecosystems into one place. The Colosseum was, in the most grotesque possible sense, a museum of the entire planet's wildlife, curated by death. So, how did you actually catch a lion in 80 AD, with no tranquilizer darts, no rifles, no vehicles, no steel? The answer is that you didn't do it alone, and you didn't do it gently. Capturing arena animals was a specialized profession. On the fringes of the empire, particularly in North Africa, there were professional hunters whose entire livelihood was supplying beasts to the games. Some regions became famous for it. The hunters of the Mauritanian territories in North Africa were renowned for their skill at taking leopards. These weren't amateurs. They were the elite specialists of an entire shadow industry, and the demand for them was so consistent that whole local economies grew up around feeding the arena. The two most common capture methods, illustrated again and again in surviving Roman mosaics, were the pit and the net. The pit was used mainly for big cats. The hunters would dig a deep hole and build a low fence or wall around its edge. In the center, on a raised pillar, they would tie live bait, usually a goat, a lamb, or a kid. The terrified bleating would draw the lion in. The lion, focused entirely on the bait, would charge and leap the fence and drop straight down into the pit, where it could be caged. The bait often survived. The lion did not get a vote. The net was used for a huge range of animals, driven by lines of beaters making noise, herding panicked creatures toward hidden traps and enclosures. There's a famous mosaic from a villa in Piazza Armerina in Sicily, sometimes called the Great Hunt, that shows the whole operation in vivid detail. Animals being chased, netted, loaded into wooden crates, hauled onto wagons, and carried toward ships. Ostriches, gazelles, leopards, even a rhinoceros, all being processed like cargo. It is, essentially, a documentary in stone of an ancient wildlife trafficking operation. And there was a crucial preference baked into all of this. Hunters strongly favored capturing young animals. Cubs and juveniles were easier to subdue, easier to transport, and easier to train. Which means that behind every adult lion that walked into the arena, there was often a trail of a dead mother and a cub taken from the wild before it ever learned to hunt for itself. Now comes the part of the journey that killed more animals than the arena ever did: transport. Catching the animal was only the beginning. Now you had to move a live, furious, terrified apex predator across a desert, onto a ship, across the Mediterranean, and up to the gates of Rome, and keep it alive the whole way, because a dead lion is worthless, and an expensive one at that. This was, by any standard, a logistical nightmare. The animals were loaded into reinforced wooden cages. They had to be fed, they had to be watered, they had to be kept from killing each other and from killing their handlers. The sea crossing alone could take up to 20 days, depending on routes and weather, and during those weeks, packed in the dark hold of a ship, animals died in enormous numbers from starvation, dehydration, injury, disease, and sheer stress. We have a wonderfully human piece of evidence for how frustrating this was. The Roman statesman and writer Cicero, back in the 50s BC, was trying to organize games and had ordered panthers to be captured and shipped. In his letters, he actually complains, in writing 2,000 years ago, about the difficulty of getting the cats and the quality of the ones that finally arrived. The mighty machine of the Roman beast trade and one of its most famous customers is essentially writing a one-star review about his shipment of mangy cats not being scary enough. The mortality was so severe that there are accounts of animals arriving in such poor physical condition, emaciated, sick, half dead, that they couldn't even be used for the spectacle they'd been dragged across the world to perform. A starving, broken lion can't put on a show. So when shipments arrived in bad shape, the program would be quietly adjusted, and the condemned prisoners who were meant to face beasts were instead simply executed by other means. Sit with the scale of that waste for a moment. An animal is hunted in the mountains of Morocco. Its mother is killed. It is dropped into a pit, caged, hauled overland, loaded onto a ship, sailed for weeks across the sea, and it dies in the dark before it ever sees Rome. And from the Roman perspective, the only tragedy in that entire sequence was the lost ticket revenue. But let's say our lion survives. It makes it across the sea, it reaches Italy. It is not yet sent into the arena. Because here's something that surprises people. A wild lion, fresh off a boat, is actually a disappointing arena animal. This is the detail that reveals just how sophisticated and how dark the whole operation really was. Wild animals, when shoved suddenly into the roaring chaos of a packed amphitheater, don't behave like the bloodthirsty monsters the crowd wants. They do the opposite. They panic. They cower. They try to hide. A terrified lion pressing itself against the arena wall, trying to disappear, is not entertainment. It's a refund request from 50,000 angry Romans. So the animals had to be prepared. Around Rome and other major cities, there were menageries, essentially holding facilities and training grounds where captured beasts were kept, tamed, and conditioned before the games. And the people running them were the bestiarii, the specialized animal handlers and fighters of the arena. Their job was to turn a frightened animal into a reliable killer. Some of their methods involved training the animals to associate certain triggers with attacking, but the most reliable method, the one that comes up again and again, was simpler and crueler: starvation. You keep the animal in the dark. You don't feed it. You let hunger build until hunger is the only thing left in its body. And then you release it into the bright arena, where the first thing it sees is a human being who cannot escape. The animal isn't fighting for the emperor's glory. It doesn't care about Rome. It's just starving. The entire spectacle of the ferocious beast was, in large part, manufactured cruelty. An engineered hunger pointed at a helpless target for the entertainment of a crowd that had no idea and no interest in how the illusion was produced. The bestiarii were also relentless innovators in cruelty, because the crowd's appetite was bottomless and they always needed something new. They built collapsing platforms that gave condemned prisoners the illusion of escape before dropping them into waiting animals. They tied victims to stakes and wheeled them out on carts. They paused the action so the crowd could place bets on which man would be eaten first. This was an industry of death, and like any industry, it competed for attention. Now zoom all the way out, because the most staggering consequence of all of this isn't about any single animal or any single show. It's about what this machine did to the planet. When you run an operation that consumes hundreds of thousands of wild animals over several centuries, you are not just entertaining a city. You are conducting one of the first large-scale, human-driven assaults on regional wildlife in recorded history. And the evidence suggests the Romans noticed the effects themselves. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the games began to change. Not because Romans grew a conscience, but because the animals were getting harder to find. The supply was running dry. The very ecosystems the empire had been strip mining for centuries were starting to collapse under the pressure. Compare the numbers. Titus killed an estimated 9,000 animals to open the Colosseum in 80 AD. Trajan killed 11,000 to celebrate his victories. But by 248 AD, when Rome celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its founding, a massive, prestigious event, the spectacular animal lineup included 32 elephants, 10 tigers, 60 lions, 30 leopards, 10 elk, and a rhinoceros. An immense list, yes, but a tiny shadow of what an emperor could have summoned a century and a half earlier. The well was running dry. And in some places, it ran dry completely. By the time the animal games were finally outlawed in the 6th century AD, entire species had been wiped out of entire regions specifically to feed the arena. Elephants vanished from the North African coast. Hippos disappeared from the lower Nile. The Romans hunted some regional populations to local extinction, and the effects of that ancient overhunting echoed for centuries. This is the part that should genuinely stop you. We tend to think of human-caused extinction and ecological collapse as a modern problem, a product of industry, guns, and global capitalism. But here is an empire 2,000 years ago with nothing but pits, nets, ships, and sheer organizational willpower, methodically emptying the wild places of 3 continents to fill an afternoon's entertainment. The technology was primitive. The consequences were not. The capacity of organized humans to drain the natural world has been with us for a very, very long time. We just got more efficient at it. So let's go back to where we started. You're on the sand. The gate is finishing its rise. And now you know what's behind it. It's not just a lion. It's the final product of a machine that stretched from the forests of Britain to the mountains of India, from the Nile to the Alps. A machine of professional hunters, soldiers, merchants, ship captains, cage builders, animal trainers, and handlers. A machine that killed most of its victims long before they ever reached you, and that was slowly, invisibly, emptying the wild corners of the known world to keep the crowd above you screaming. The animal that walks out of that gate is starving, not by accident, but by design. It traveled across a continent and a sea to be here. Its hunger was manufactured. Its rage was engineered. And in a few moments, it will do exactly what it has been deliberately built to do. And 50,000 people will roar, and almost none of them will ever wonder where it came from. That's the thing about spectacle. It's designed to make you look at the surface. The lion in the sunlight, the blood, the noise, the drama. It's designed so that you never think about the pit in Morocco, the dead mother, the dark hold of the ship, the weeks of starvation in a cage beneath the city. The Romans built one of history's great entertainment machines. And like all great entertainment machines, its real genius was making sure the audience only ever saw the part they were supposed to see. We watch the lion. We never count the cost. And maybe the most Roman thing of all, the thing that should feel uncomfortably familiar, is just how good we still are, 2,000 years later, at enjoying the show without ever asking what it took to put it in front of us. The gate is open now. The crowd is on its feet. Try not to think about how far that animal traveled to get here.